we were coming up to having to start the film. We knew we wanted to put a chase in the film, and we didn't have an idea for one. And we said, well, let's leave my apartment. This was on a Friday. And let's just start walking south until we can come up with an idea for this chase scene. And forgive me, I've lost 40 pounds recently, so my clothes are difficult. We started walking. We walked in New York for 55 blocks. And we felt the subway rumbling beneath our feet, and we saw the smoke coming out of the street. We walked into Brooklyn. We saw the last remaining elevated station in Brooklyn, and we started to what you call spitball ideas. I don't even remember who started to say what. We said, what about a car chasing an elevated train? Well, how does the guy get on the train? Well, how does the other guy get the car? And then we didn't know how fast an elevated train went at its fastest. If it went 100 miles an hour or nearabouts, the chase would not have been possible the way I did it. So we then went to the transit authority, to a guy who was running the transit authority, and we had an appointment with him, and we asked him, how fast does one of these trains go at its fastest? And he said, well, 50 miles an hour. So I knew we had a chase scene that would work. But then he said, but I'm not going to give you guys permission to do this. He said, there's never been anybody who's hijacked an elevated train. There's never been 2 elevated trains that have crashed. He said, if I gave you permission to do this, I would lose my job. And we said, oh, well, thank you very much. And we started to leave. And at the door, he stopped us. He said, wait a minute. We turned around, and he said, did you hear what I said? And I said, yeah, you said if you gave us permission to do this, you'd lose your job. He said, that's right. He said, what's that worth to you? And Phil D'Antoni said, well, what's it worth to you? And he said, $40,000 and a one-way ticket to Jamaica. And I said, well, why one way? And he said, because if I let you guys shoot this film the way you're telling me, I will lose my job and never be able to come back here. And that's been the case. He was fired after the film came out, and he lives in Jamaica happily ever after. And $40,000 was a lot of money. Our budget was $1.5 million, and we had to find $40,000 to get permission to shoot on the elevated train. And they dedicated a line for us, the Stillwell Avenue line, near Coney Island. There were 2 things that were unusual. One was we built a 3-story set in a studio on the west side of Manhattan that was the interior of the house. The exterior was in Georgetown at 36th and Prospect. And the interior was a 3-story set at a place called Manhattan Studios on West 54th Street and 9th Avenue. And one day I got a call from the production manager at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And he said, don't bother to come to work today. And I said, why, am I fired? He said, no, the set burned down a couple of hours ago. And it turned out that, in fact, this set, which was empty at the time, there was one guard sitting outside of it, and he saw smoke coming out of the door, and he opened the door, and the whole set was in flames. And to this day, nobody knows how that happened or why, but the insurance company paid off on the theory that it was an old stage and that a bird may have flown into a light box and set off an electrical fire. The only other thing that happened that was really weird was Jason Miller, who played the young priest. His wife and son were playing at Rockaway Beach in November. It was a cold time in New York. And they were playing on the beach, and there was only one other person visible on the beach, a guy doing motorcycle wheelies, about a half a mile away. And sure enough, this guy on his motorcycle, came around and struck this young 8-year-old son of Jason Miller. And we were shooting at Fordham at the time. And the priests at Fordham stayed up and prayed with Jason for 3 nights. This boy was near death. He had a 50-50 chance to live, or less. And his life was spared. That's the only 2 things I can remember that were really unusual. And I told you about the crucifix on the church in Rome. But weird things happen on every picture. If the shoot's for 10 months, it's going to multiply. But yes, the legend has far exceeded the facts. But I remember Jason Miller and I after the film, we would walk the streets of New York, and people would stop him on the street, and they'd say, "Father, I think my daughter's possessed." And he'd say, "No, I'm just an actor. I'm not a priest. I can't do anything." He finally really had to go underground.